Hello, everyone. This is your co-host, Stu, and I'm here with the Paranormalist, Patty Wilson. Hi, Patty. How are you this fine March day?
Hello, Sue, and I am absolutely amazing. It was a beautiful day out today.
Mrs. Stu and I did a little retail therapy, drove into your former hometown, did some walking around in stores, which I'd never been in. Well, one of them I hadn't been in before, one I had, and had a good day.
I kind of rested, wrote podcasts, and that's about all I did today. I was quiet today.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, most of my week's usually loud and noisy with lots of kids, so today was a day off.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this episode. If you are new, thank you for finding us. And I hope you'll stick around, click the like and subscribe if you like our content. It's kind of a no frills podcast. We don't have a lot of, fancy, flashy neon lights and graphics and things like that. So we kind of rely on the content. If you are a return viewer or listener, thank you for coming back. And we hope you enjoy this episode because we certainly enjoy bringing them to you. And with that, I think that everything else is down below in the description. So I don't need to keep talking. So it's your turn. What's our topic for tonight?
So, if you ever wonder how we come across the topics we come across, a lot of times they fall in my lap. And this particular topic fell in my lap a couple weeks ago. I just kept coming up with material on the subject. And I am 60 years old, and I swear to you, I never really gave this subject a sincere amount of attention up until that point. But this week, we're going to talk about ghouls, G-H-O-U-L-S. Didn't know much about them before I started, but after my deep dive, I think I got some really interesting information. So I had just literally had a passing acquaintance with the idea of ghouls. That to me, they were, something in some old poetry and what have you, and the idea that they were these things that hung out in cemeteries and ate dead people. That's pretty much what everybody thinks about for a ghoul. I went on a journey to learn about them, and boy, oh boy, is it a lot more complicated than that. So let's get some background and some history. So the idea of the ghoul comes from Mesopotamia, and it is believed that they live in a alternate universe, another world called Nath or Nath, depending on who's pronouncing it. And this is a world of no joy. And they are akin in some ways to the jinn. They are mentioned in the Quran, and they come from the Arabic countries originally. That's where this all begins. Now, interestingly enough, we're going to see that they have given us a great deal of information that we've now assimilated into other beings. So they share some characteristics with Nephilim, with vampires, with werewolves, with just all these different things. But they seem to be their own and distinct creatures. From what I have read, the jinn have a complicated relationship with the ghouls. And the ghouls were not necessarily liked by the jinn, so they would often fight against them. There's even stories of the jinn protecting the dying or protecting the dead in their graves if they were people that they respected, so that the ghouls couldn't come and get them. But in the most true form, a ghoul is a demonic entity, is the best way I can explain it, and often presenting itself as female, and is able to shapeshift into other creatures. It can shapeshift from its own natural state of being, which is a very hideous thing. So it's got a canine-like face with a muzzle. It's got large fangs, red eyes. It's bipedal. It has hooves on its feet and hands with claws. It leans forward and hunched over. When they're fed, they have a regular sort of skin. When they're starving their skin will become translucent and you can see their veins under it, and they'll turn kind of a gray or a tan. And as they age, they kind of pick up a green tinge. And their skin is said to carry bacteria that causes infections in humans, which might very well be from the fact that they exist underground or in charnel houses and with the dead. So things that, would make us ill. But that is not even the half of it. So these things are not mindless. They're not stupid. They're not just feasting on the dead. In fact, in the original documents, they didn't eat the dead. They killed the living. They were hunters. And over the course of time, the story begins to morph and change. And it looks like it's more because humans were getting more wise to them and avoiding them. So one of the original stories that you'll come up with is, it kind of goes something like this. So you're traveling along. They tend to seek people who are by themselves, or just one or two of them at a clip. And you see this fire in the distance, and you're walking this lonely road, and you're thinking, oh, there's somebody up there ahead of me. Now remember, this would have been, many, many, many centuries ago. And so, the light and the fire sounds like something like safety. You want to go towards something that might be a safe thing. There's another human up there is what you're thinking. This could be a good thing because now you have some place to stop, to rest, another human to pass the night with. And when you get close, it's a young woman. She's very pretty because they can morph, as I said, and they can morph into a young, beautiful woman, which is often what they do. Although they can also shift into animals, they can shift into a man. But most often they present as a female. And, you're sitting there and you're talking to her. She's very sweet. Come sit down by the fire, rest. And then before you know it, suddenly she starts to shift and she attacks. Sometimes if there's more than one of them there, the other one's coming out of the darkness. They sometimes hunt in packs. And then they attack. Sometimes you survive and sometimes you don't. If you survive, you're very lucky. But even then, because of the disease in the skin and what have you, you could still get sick. In fact, it is believed that there's several ways to become or to turn into a ghoul. And one of them is by being bit by a ghoul, which is reminiscence of vampires.
Werewolves.
Now, one of the things that I found really interesting about them is that if they come across a corpse, or if they kill a person, they eat the person. They can absorb the person's memories and thoughts and hold their soul captive for a while. So some of them are very smart. Some of them, they'll shift into their human shape and live among us and try to influence us in our laws, our rules, the things that we do. It's fascinating. They, in their natural state, will live underground often or in abandoned buildings. There's a lot of stories of them coming out of like abandoned buildings in cities, out of the basements of these buildings and what have you, to feed at night and hunt. And that would make a lot of sense because you would have a lot of people who were disposable you could take easily. Homeless people, people that are have no families, that are maybe wandering the streets, things like that. So there's a good crop of people for them to hunt in the cities. Now, one of the things that I found really interesting is that they also have a territory. Like they are in competition with vampires and werewolves for territory. You can't have all three feeding in the same area because it quickly becomes obvious. And so they will fight for a territory, and then the others will go and find another territory, stake their claim, and so have you. And that's one of the reasons you don't hear often of like vampires being in the same places that werewolves are being seen. And apparently the same with the ghouls, that each of them recognizes that if they overhunt a territory, the humans will know. They can be killed and attacked. You can use, this is interesting, silver, blessed weapons, charms, salt, holy water. And here's another thing that's interesting, and this is, there are people who throughout history have been hunters of ghouls. Like they've done this for like vampire hunters. Along with that, they are not, they can cross water, but they have difficulty to cross water. They also have difficulty with sunlight. They do not die in sunlight, but it causes them discomfort. So if you were a hunter, you would want to like set them up in a situation where you could make them weak and have, you know, less comfort by maybe, you know, getting them to cross over water where they're going to be at a weakened state, or drag them out into the sunlight where they're going to already be in pain and they're not going to fight as much. And there are apparently different types of ghouls. So they don't all look the same. They don't all act the same. There's what's called the crawlers. And the crawlers are these ghouls that literally do exactly that. They don't walk upright. They crawl around, dragging their back half, and they lay over top of the dead and prey on them and feed on them. And then they crawl off into the darkness and go back down underground. And then you have others that are upright bipedal, very much like humans, and others that are more canine in their looks. They also have the ability to procreate.
Oh, okay.
So there are these bizarre stories. Well, first of all, they can procreate together, but it seems like they tend to try to procreate with humans to interject the human bloodline into theirs. And there are a couple ways for them to do it. Not necessarily mating as we humans mate, but they will find a female corpse and place the, I don't know what you call it, fetus, the nucleus of what's going to be one of them inside of it, and it feeds. It has a symbiotic relationship. It feeds off of that dead person's flesh as it's growing, almost like something in a cocoon, and then bursts out of it, and they gather up their young. They also will shapeshift a newborn baby into what looks like a human baby, steal the human child, either to feed or to teach it how to hunt for them, because humans can go in places that they can't. Mm-hmm. And then when the child begins to hit puberty, where it's beginning to make the changes spontaneously, they steal it back. Wow. It's a lot more complicated than we thought.
I'm just flabbergasted. I mean, it's you know, you've had some, and I don't want to make it sound like, I mean, you purposefully try to find something that's so bizarre, but I mean, that's the world you live in. That's what you find. Wow.
Well, like I said, I just kind of had that overview, like, oh, I'm not going to read a bunch of stories about these monsters that eat dead people. It's just disgusting. And, you know, I'm not interested, and I never was. And I started to look into it, and I was like, holy crap, there is like so much lore around this. Like, this is a distinct, separate set of folklore and creatures, and I had no clue how interesting it was. And like I said, there's stories of them stealing human children to eat them. There's stories of them teaching these children how to be decoys and hunters for them. And I have to tell you, that rings a bell, because I have read stories about vampires stealing human children for the same purpose, because the human children can lure victims into an alley or, you know, into some place, and then the vampires can attack, because the human child can go places and do things, and they have a pathos to them that we as human beings respond to on an empathetic level. And so these beings, these things, whatever they are, they do this as well. There are these fascinating stories all over the Middle East, Europe. Now they come out of as I said, the Middle East, but then they were written about in the Quran. They're written about in the Arabian Nights. And when the story of the Arabian Nights gets translated into European languages, then people recognize this thing and they go, oh, that's what that thing was that we protect our cemeteries from. That's what, so they now have a new term for it. And it's that the word ghoul actually comes from the Mesopotamian language. And they finally put a name to this thing that was a demon or whatever in their minds. And there's this really interesting book written by a guy named Prince Duke Peter of Queensborough. And in his book, he talks about his trips, and he was into the arcane, and he traveled the world. He was a very well-to-do man, obviously. And in there, he has this one particular segment where he talks about going into the catacombs in Paris to meet with the head of the ghouls who lived in the catacombs under the city, and to talk with them.
That takes some chutzpah.
He said he said he went into the tunnels. He knew that they were there. They knew he sent word through some middle ground person and said, I want to meet. And they said that he was welcome to come and talk to them. And he did. I can't imagine climbing into the catacombs for anything, let alone to talk to ghouls that like to eat people. But he talks about all of the things I just talked about how they bred, and that was one of the ways they bred, how they dig tunnels under the earth and then go up into the graves from underneath so they don't disturb the dead often. So like, back in 100 years ago, you would bury somebody in a wooden casket. A lot of times you would find if the casket's disturbed from the top, and we're going to talk about some stories where that happens, people know, right? And so then they would either be like what they call resurrectionists, which are the grave robbers who stole bodies for medical research, or something like this. And so people would find out about it. So a lot of times they lived in tunnels they dug under the earth. So they would come in the edges of cemeteries. They would dig through the cemetery and come up into a grave from beneath so as to not let the living know that they had stolen the body.
Well, you'd think then there would be sinkholes all over a graveyard.
You would think, but that was the story. That's how they would steal the dead, rather than coming from the top, was they would try to come from the bottom so as to cause less of a knowledge. And it was just, there's actually a book, if you look up Prince Duke Peter of Queensborough, there's a book. There's also on Facebook a gentleman who reads excerpts from the book, which are really interesting. He has a copy of the book and he reads some excerpts from it, and it's just fascinating. And it comes from the word gula, Gulla, I think it is, and it's the word that means demons from the underworld. So as I said, they come from a Nath, which is supposedly this realm of nothing but sadness. And they step from that realm into the earth's realm and feed and live among us from time to time. So among the other things is the idea of ghouls predates the Muslim faith, although it's mentioned in the Quran, so it's always attached to the Muslim faith. But the idea itself came from far before that. It is believed that they were born from a creature called, the original first one was born of a creature called the Iblis, which is an Islamic equivalent to Satan. So that he bred with something and created the first ghoul. There are beliefs that they live, some of them live among us in the daytime, holding jobs, shopping, doing, just like we pass them by and don't realize what they are, which I think is really scary. I can't even imagine. Imagine you're shopping with somebody and they look a little bit off to you, or they smell badly, which is one of the first things that they talk about. Now, there is a different kind of ghoul, which I wanted to make mention of. They are all over the world. There are Middle Eastern ghouls, there are European ghouls, there's a whole culture of them in the Orient. The United States has ghouls. They very much sound in some ways like a skinwalker. One of the various ways you can become a ghoul is to give up your humanity by eating cannibalizing flesh. And there's a really creepy story that I'm going to tell in a little bit here from World War I of what some people believe are the makings of some ghouls. So there's just so many things that can happen. So they not only can they be born as a ghoul, but you can give up your humanity and be turned into one, much like a vampire
Or a Wendigo.
or a Wendigo. Yeah, a lot of ways to get there. Now, the only way to be 100% certain that they are dead, like I said, they'll flee from amulets, holy water, the salt, all that stuff. But the only way to be 100% certain they are dead is to decapitate them, which is something that I'm pretty sure the cops would frown on today.
Yeah,
Try telling that to the cops.
yeah, especially if you were wrong. Yeah.
Well, I don't even know if they have to be wrong. I mean, like, seriously, I don't know what happens to it when it dies, but and if you only get this is one of the things I thought was interesting. It says you only get one blow to kill the beast. 2 or more strikes will resurrect the creature and almost certainly spell death for the person attempting to kill it. Because only 1 strike can be used to kill the ghoul, decapitation is preferred because it should die quickly. The other things that through the years they've now added is electrocution, and certain concentrated acids. They don't name what they are, and fire is a possibility. Fire isn't just a possibility. They're not saying that it's a good thing, but it is a thing. So anybody who has read H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu books would have a passing understanding of ghouls. He writes about them, and there's also something called the Pickman model, which is an author or a artist who did some of the illustrations for Lovecraft. And his version of a ghoul is what we commonly think of as one today. Sometimes there are outbreaks of them in a certain area, which is interesting. So basically they begin to breed in an area and then they start feeding, and since there's so many of them, people begin to notice that they're there. They attempt to stop that, but they don't always have that ability to do so. And there are the hybrids, as I said. The hybrids are more likely to live among the humans. They will often help supply unfortunate humans for their family on the ghoul side. You can see that there, and also and this is interesting, one of the main reasons that they do the hybrids, though, is not because they need the help as much as it is that they need to not let their bloodline stagnate. And people don't realize throughout history how important bloodlines have been and are to this day. We don't talk about it anymore. We don't think about it much as a society, but everything matters about your bloodline. That's why whenever you're raising livestock, you have to make sure that you don't, let them procreate over and over, because it messes with your bloodline. That's why there's laws in place that you can't marry your first cousin, because it screws your bloodline. And that's why the jinn made it with the humans to enhance their bloodline. That's why the demonic laid with the human women to enhance and change their bloodlines. Bloodlines have a place in history that we don't think about. And these ghouls are certainly something that are interested in our bloodline. It's definitely something to think about. We do not realize what it is that makes us special, but it's our bloodline and our soul. Those are the 2 things that they seek. One of the reasons that they devour or kill is to steal our soul for a while, which is terrifying.
Yeah, I'm kind of attached to mine, I think.
I'm very attached to mine. Let me tell you, I plan to not give it up to anybody but God. So yeah. Now in Palestine, it's interesting that in that area, they have ghouls that actually live in lots of the different villages, and they have different characteristics. They have different relationships. They've actually kind of come out from under the ground, and the people know about them, and they talk about them, and they like, stay out of that area. Don't upset that one. This one's got hair. This one's a large hairy one. This one's one of the hairless skin ones. And they all have different, they've kind of made a pact with them. I don't want to say it's literally a pact, but they've kind of made some sort of a compromise that they'll, as long as they leave them alone, and they don't take too many, they'll, not go after them. And of course, it's kind of hard to kill them. So you can see where it might be better to just try to let them live and let live, kind of a deal.
Wow.
As I said, I mean, seriously,
yeah, that's a weird kind of daytime.
I can't even imagine. Like, don't go to the cemetery, sweetheart. The ghouls are out tonight. It's their night to feed.
Mm-hmm. Now I could see if it went both ways. If we fed on them.
Yeah.
But I mean that seems rather one-sided.
Yeah, I have not come across anything that said anything about how we made anything out of this deal. Like, it's all about making peace with them so that they're not killing us, basically, is all we get out of it. They're not killing a lot of us. But then, there's the same argument can be made for aliens. There's that argument that, the government made a deal that will let you take a few and harvest a few if you don't touch the masses. And you can make that, the demonic made that deal. So humans have been making that deal. If any of those stories are true, the humans have been making that deal for quite a long time.
Well, even going back to the Incas and other races of people that human sacrifice. They were doing that, to protect the many, they sacrificed the one or the few.
Exactly. It has always been what it is. In Thailand, there is something called the Hungry Ghost Festival. And this is a festival where some people believe they're actually celebrating and paying homage almost to the ghouls. Of course, they have their own name for them. But these are the wandering spirits, and to keep them from harming the living, they offer them food, burn incense, and try to get them to go back across the bridge from this realm to their realm. Very much sounds like a ghoul. They also will burn fake money. They will leave coins for them, and they're paying them off basically to not attack their families.
Supernatural protection money.
Seriously, it's crazy, but it happens. I mean, they've come up with some sort of thing, and they do that with. You can find stories of that all throughout the world, like pixies and fairies and elves and what have you, where people have left them offerings and said, like, as long as we give you this offering, the mine shaft won't cave in, or they'll let us alone and we can garden and we'll be okay. And you see a lot of the same kind of thing in Ireland, and in particular, where they've kind of made these odd deals with the fairies and the pixies, and there's changelings that happen there as well, where they steal human children and carry them off, and and as long as it doesn't become too much, the humans tolerate it because they want to keep the peace. I don't know how they would argue it anyway, because they have a set of, they're not as material as we are. They can come and go in ways we cannot. There are ways, however, to tell if they're not, if a ghoul is pretending to be a human. Smell is one. It'll always have an off, rotting smell, no matter what it tries, even if it's covered with perfume and what have you. and they must eat regularly or they begin to, I don't want to say disintegrate, but they go downhill. So they stop being able to shape shift. They start showing their regular shape. They struggle with, basically looks like they're slowly dying. The skin becomes pale. There's veins that become visible. Their nails will grow long and claw-like. They will look like they're starving, even if they're eating other foods, and they begin to mentally deteriorate. And then at that point, of course, you know, there's no question, it is what it is. It's estimated that in order for them to be healthy, they must eat 10 to 15 pounds of human flesh per day.
Where does it all go?
No idea. Well, think about it, and I'm not being funny. If you think about, like, they've had to make accommodations for us changing who and what we are. Like today, I can't imagine how you would dig into a grave and get somebody, because we have those great big vaults and all that other stuff going. But we're going to talk about that in a little bit. They will also kidnap human women, hold them in crypts or underground, and then mate with them if they need offspring. Which then, of course, gently took me towards the 411s and like people just disappearing. It was interesting to read some of that. Now I'm going to talk about specific incidents of possible ghoul sightings. There was a case I came across for a young woman and her boyfriend. This was 2014. We're on a camping trip. They were walking along a dirt road when they saw a woman pass them. They said they had this horrible feeling go down their spine. They decided to turn around and go a different direction. And as they went off on one of the side trails, the woman suddenly appeared on the hill in front of them. Same woman. She was maybe 100 feet away. And they said that the figure was leaning forward, hunched forward. And then it moved to the left. And then it realized they were watching it. And it smelled terrible. And they could catch a whiff of it in the wind. And at that moment, it just simply faded away. It disappeared. And she said that it was tall, thin, slender, shadow-like. And that as soon as this happened, they were completely convinced that they were in terror, that they were in danger. So they turned around, ran back to the camp, packed up immediately, and got in the car and took off. And even then, they were afraid that it followed them. And they were completely convinced that this was a ghoul. And they said the stench of death, like of rotting flesh, was so strong around it. In 2003, there was a story in West Virginia of two people who encountered what they called a family of ghouls. And the two survivors made it to the police station and said they killed this family of ghouls. The people went back with the police. I cannot even imagine this story being true, but I can't find anything one way or the other. But I'm going to tell you the story. You take it for what it's worth, guys. So the story is that they encountered these people, this family of what turned out to be ghouls. They were going to get killed by these things and managed to escape after having killed a couple of them. Went out to the police station, told the police what had happened, that they were being kidnapped, that these beings that looked like people but turned out to be ghouls that were going to eat them. And they took them back and to this house where they had been taken. And there wasn't a single soul there, but you could see that somebody had been there very recently. There was nobody dead, so the police couldn't do anything with them. I can't even imagine. There is a gentleman by the name of Mike Mulligan. Now, I've tried to look this dude up. I have found a Mike Mulligan from this time frame, but he seems to have been a sportscaster. So I cannot find any validation for this man. Maybe it's the same fella. Maybe there's two different fellas. But supposedly he produced he did an interview with a ghoul in the 1960s and then proceeded to put it out there for people to read. Don't know any more about it. Like I said, I spent hours looking for this Mike Mulligan, could not find him. I went back to the primary source for the article, and it is no longer up. Not sure why, guys, but I'm just letting you know that the story's out there. There are people who've referenced this story. Multiple people have referenced the story, so at some point it did exist. There's a story of an encounter again in Paris in 1849, where a gentleman by the name of Sergeant Francos Bertrand was sentenced to death for digging up corpses and eating their flesh. Some claimed he was a vampire, some claimed that he was a ghoul, and he escaped or disappeared prior to being hung. Nobody ever heard from him again. And again, I looked up references. That guy did exist. Now, this is an interesting case here, and I wanted to share it. This is from 1957. There is a cemetery called the Whitmire Cemetery in Florida. And in 1957, there were some really interesting things that happened there. It's off of a place called Gull Point Cemetery, located off of Crichton Road. A caretaker was making his rounds. He found a grave disturbed. There is a 3-inch thick concrete slab of approximately 1,000 pounds that had been slid over. The casket had been opened, and the remains of a girl by the name of Ruby Lee Robertson was exposed. She was 22 years old, had died the previous winter. He immediately called the police, of course. Neighbors said, when they were questioned, said that around 2 in the morning, they heard a howling sound, but they couldn't tell you what caused it. Now, interestingly enough, everybody who's ever heard these things make a sound talk about it making a ticking, mewling, howling sound. So they communicate, they have a language. These ghouls have a language of their own, and it sounds like ticking, howling, and mewling. And when just as they're preparing to eat, they'll start doing this ticking sound. So it's in, at least in the realm of possibility. So 3 days after this happened, a man's visiting his wife's grave in the Whitmore Cemetery. When he finds it's opened, that her body's been exposed, he had buried her in her pajamas, I'm not sure why, and that her pajama bottoms had been removed. The authorities are again called. They're absolutely shocked. Now, I want you to know that they did do some testing, and none of the bodies were sexually molested. They were just opened. A few months later, and this would be February 1958, a lady by the name of Mrs. Went was visiting the cemetery when she discovered the grave of a 14-year-old girl named Joan Danley that had been opened. She had been struck by a car the fall before and had been buried there. A 1,200-pound slab had been removed from her grave. The casket was open. There were plaster casts made of bare footprints, and the local sheriff offered a reward for information of $1,500. It was raised by the community. This is becoming a real problem. This is the 3rd grave desecrated in less than a year. At 8:30 on March the 8th, Mrs. Tom Holmes went to the cemetery to visit her husband's grave. She discovered the open grave of a little girl named Suzette Parker. She was 11 years old. When the police came, they realized the grave was completely empty. Now think about what it would take to move that massive slab. And how did nobody notice? There are houses on the street. So yeah, you could probably put a apparatus together and do this, and you probably could do it and nobody would have noticed at 3 o'clock in the morning. But it's still, I can't imagine, it's a difficult task for one human being to pull off without equipment. And so anyhow, this one, she's missing, just missing. Helicopters are brought out, bloodhounds are brought out, and mounted cops are brought out. A horse spooked when they got to a specific area, the rider got off and found that the little girl was hidden in brush about 250 yards from the entry to the cemetery. She was laying on her back. She was still dressed in her dress. Nothing was done to her, but she seemed to have been hidden there as if something was spooked and had to get out of the way, and figured it would come back for the body later. People began to patrol the area at night. The cops were out at night. People were angry. They wanted to know what was going on. And interestingly enough, no, never, ever again has anybody been disturbed at Whitmore Cemetery. Whatever was going on there, the being, whatever it was, moved on. But think about it. It wouldn't take moving that far. I mean, in 1958, you could cross this country in a few hours. So you just move to a different location. And it becomes an isolated story of crazy people robbing a grave. And that's it. And then it pops up somewhere else, and and that's how serial killers work. I mean, there are serial killers that get away for, decades, because they murder one or two people in one area, then they move all the way across country and do it again. And it takes years for the cops to put this whole scenario together. So why not for these things? These things have been around for a long time, and why would they not be able to piece that idea together? You just move on. There's this really interesting story from the Arabic nations. This is a fairly popular story. It's about this man and his brother who are going to his brother's wedding, and they're bringing the bride's wedding clothing with them as a gift. That's the first gift the man gives his new bride, is her wedding gown. And along the way, they're traveling, they're walking, and they come across this lonely woman who they tell her, where they're headed. And she's like, "Oh, I'm going in that direction. Can I walk with you for safety?" They're like, "Not only can you walk with us, but we'll be gentlemen and we'll let you ride the camel." So she rides a camel, and they're going along, and eventually she asks them if they can stop for a few moments so she can rest and take care of herself. She goes around the side of a little hill to, do her business, and doesn't come back. So the one guy walks out to make sure she's okay, and, just see if she's all right. It doesn't come back. So the other brother walks around there eventually after there's no response. He's not getting any response from from calling out. And he finds the woman laying on top of his dead brother on the ground, eating him. And when he starts to scream, he's praying, for help. It makes her turn around, get up, turn around, and she says, she starts to confront him and says, "Stop that." And he won't stop praying. He's just, he's constantly praying. And according to the story, fireballs fell from heaven and split the woman in two, saving the man, as though their prayers had called down help from the gods above. And, there are so many stories like that. In other cultures, you're going to find that there's a kind of, we're going to move to the United States. So there's something called El Coco, and it's a kind of a boogeyman or a myth or a legend. This one's from Texas, but there are similar ones in Spain, Portugal, all over Latin America, and they're documented in a book by a folklorist by the name of J.A. Hernandez. And he has an entire book of this stuff. And they're supposed to be these creatures that look like humans and then turn into essentially their version of a ghoul, and eats travelers or kills travelers, passers-by, and devours them. And and they're particularly fond of children. So there's a lot of, the children hear the story of the El Coco, and they know that they're not supposed to go out after dark because these beings are looking for them. One of the things that makes these interesting is that they are a little bit different than our standard ones. As I said, there's hairy ones, there's these things that are crawlers, there's these other ones that are the standardized ghouls. And this version is supposedly a being that climbs up on the roof of a building and has this long tongue that it tastes the air with, like a snake. And its tongue can go through a window and taste the human. And when it finds the taste of a human, then it will attack. It's really an disturbing story of how they function. So I had told you that I was going to tell you a story about how demons are made. During World War I, there was a lot of trench warfare, and there was a group of French and German soldiers who were fighting, and there's a no man's land between these sets of trenches, which is this swath of land, for those who don't know, where nobody goes because you're going to get shot by one side or the other. So it's called no man's land, and people get wounded trying to cross from one side to the other, and they end up laying there crying out in pain, and it's a horrible place. And there were a group of men who either went insane because of what they had seen, but they would climb out of the trenches at night. They were literally not soldiers anymore. They had become these gibbering things. And there's a particular story of them that they would climb out and they would strip the dead and dying, that they would drag some of the dying in and kill them. They would kill people in the no man's land out of mercy as well. And that these people weren't human anymore, that they had not just gone insane, that they had crossed over and become ghouls. It's a really terrifying story, and I'm giving you the thumbnail version because you do not want to hear the in-depth version. It is exceedingly graphic. But there were several soldiers on both sides who came home and told this strange set of tales, and it took a long time for somebody to put those two sets of stories together to realize they both thought the enemy was doing it. Interestingly enough, in World War I, it's the very first Foo Fighters story I ever found too. The Germans and the French both thought that they shot down a UFO. And of course, they didn't have that term for it at the time. And they thought it was the enemy's craft. And when it hit the ground, it disappeared.
Whole nother topic. Yeah.
Yep. But I thought it was interesting that it was in the same area with all that other stuff going on, which might tie us back to demons and UFOs.
Maybe.
But yeah, so it's an interesting story. Like I said, it's really graphic, so I thought I would tell it, but I didn't want to tell it in great detail for that reason, because they killed a lot of people, and soldiers from both sides would shoot at them at night and never seemed to injure them.
Okay, well, I'm kind of glad you didn't get into the details.
Yeah, it's not worth it. I don't want to do that to anybody. But it's a interesting story because both sides thought the other side was doing it and that they were just these barbarians, and then they realized that it wasn't them. So then the question was, what was it? Were they just crazy soldiers who had gone mad, or was it really the ghouls? And if they were crazy soldiers, did they cross over into being ghouls? And I wanted to share one last story. This one is a really interesting account written by a man who believes he encountered one in 2008. He sent a letter and then a series of letters between Nick Redfern and himself. So I'm going to be working from Nick Redfern's work for this particular account. This began in 2008, and he wrote Mr. Redfern that he thought that he had encountered a ghoul. He said that he was working in Florida, in Tampa, Florida, at a bar. About 2 o'clock in the morning, he was cashing everything out and getting ready to shut the bar down when these two people came in. The waitresses were pretty much done. The bar was going to shut down in about 40 minutes. And he was kind of, I can't imagine how disgusting it is to see two customers come in at 2:30 in the morning, when you're just ready to shut the whole doggone thing down and go home and go to bed because you're exhausted. But these two people came in, and he said, the last of the barflies had stumbled out at 2:30. I'm finishing up everything, and these guys walk in. at this point, he says to them, "Hey guys, last call. I'm only taking cash now. Credit cards all turned off. You know, you might want to go somewhere else," trying to discourage them. One of them was a young woman in her 20s. She was very pale, and she had this look that just creeped him out really bad. The other was a male, about twice her age, and he said neither one of them sat down. They both ordered like a near beer, not alcoholic, and they stood at the bar. They didn't sit at the bar, and they never took a drink. And he said, I locked the doors behind them because I was thinking I don't want anybody else to come in. And then it gets creepier. They don't take a drink. They don't do anything. They're just standing there. And the man says, they're both kind of dressed in goth style black. The girl particularly, all her clothing is black. And she's got very garish paint on her face. The man is also in black. And he says he's about not 5'9", very pale skinned, with these blue veins that I could see across his face, almost like you could see under the skin. And he said the man looked at the woman, who was about 5'6", very emaciated, wearing a long black evening gown, and she had short cut hair. She looked poorly cared for, blue eyes. And the man said to him, "I would like to show you some pictures." And this bartender says, "I got the impression that the woman was the one in control, even though the man is the only one who spoke." The woman sat there smiling glibly as the man said he wanted to show these pictures. And he said one of the things that struck him about the woman is he had interned at an undertaker shop and had decided that wasn't the job for him years earlier. But he said she smelled of formaldehyde. He said, "I clearly could smell it, and I knew exactly what I was smelling." So he said the man kind of beckons to him and says, "I want to show you some pictures." He puts a black briefcase on the bar, and he opens it up and takes out some photographs. And he said, I just thought I'll humor him, and I thought maybe these are two cops that are undercover. They're looking for somebody. Like, he's coming up with whatever in his brain to justify the craziness of this at this point. The guy hands him the photographs, and that's whenever this man's attitude changes. These are all friends of his in these pictures of this bartenders. He knows these people. And he's like looking at them, and he said, "I knew who these people were. They had timestamps. These were CCTV footage. You could tell these people had taken, this footage and printed these photographs out of it." And he said, "I looked over at the woman, and she's smiling, grinning at me as though she knows that she's got me." And he said, "I have no idea what to do about this. I'm really scared. I just want them to go." And the woman is laughing and smiling. A guy is looking at her and smiling, like they've got him, like they got control of this situation. And then he said, "We'll be in touch." Picks up the photographs out of the young bartender's hands, puts them back in the briefcase, walks over, unlocks the door, and they walk out, still smiling and looking back at him and laughing. He said it was like a dreamlike experience. He's like, "I wanted to believe it was a hallucination. I knew it wasn't. There were these two full beers still sitting on the bar that I had poured. These people were here. They were real." He said he locked the doors again. He finished cleaning up, played some music, trying to make sense out of all of this, and then got the heck out of there. He said, as I was getting ready to leave, the jukebox shut itself off. It can't shut itself off. You have to turn it off manually. There's no way for it to do that. He said, the only way you can do that is to unplug it. He said, I went over and I looked at it. It was plugged in. I unplugged it. I plugged it back in. It didn't work. As I walked to the door, the jukebox flickered back to life and began to play, even though there was I didn't put a coin in it to make it play. And he said, at that point, I thought, that's it, I'm done. And after that, he said, he actually never went back to the bar again. He found another job. He just didn't want them to know where he was. at any point. And he said, over the years, I've not told too many people. I told my wife, I told one friend. And I'm telling you, Mr. Redfern, because I think these things are still out there. I think they're still watching me. And I'm married now, and I have a stepdaughter, and I'm afraid for the two of them, and I'm afraid for me. He writes, and this is a quote, "My experience happened in late November of 2008. The bar in which I worked was in a strip mall, and all the other businesses had closed long before. I was in a fake Irish pub on the other side of the complex, which shuts down shortly after 1 p.m. or 1 a.m. I don't think any part of this is a conspiracy, since the place got busted every couple weeks. I knew cops were always watching us, but I don't think these were cops. I told you that I sent the servers home, and as you know, I was completely alone in the strip mall when the visitors arrived." And then he goes on and he talks about his feelings and his emotions about all of this. He said, "Please don't use my name. Nobody outside of my family and close friends and my lawyer know my middle name. That was the craziest part. It's not even on my social security card. But when that man called my name, he used my middle name, even though I've never used it anywhere on any document in my life. That's when I began to be scared." He said he talked to people that worked at the bar eventually. And he said, I asked one of the women who waited there, I said, "Have you ever seen these people?" And I described him. She said, "Oh, she's the gypsy." And he said, "That's interesting." And it shocked me, because when I looked at her, her clothes were garish, her shawl green, her dress black, and she just reminded me of a gypsy. So it was odd that this other woman would give her the same name. She said she came in a couple times after I left, looked around, never bought anything, and left too. And then he thanks Nick Redfern for listening to him, asking him if there's anything he could tell him that could help him to keep his family safe. I can't imagine.
No, the whole time you were telling that story, I was trying to put myself in that person's shoes. I'm thinking, like, I have no idea what I would do in a situation like that. And I hope I don't get into a situation like that.
Yeah, I mean, like, you're just locking up the bar, you're just finishing out your night, you're doing what you always do. And I have to tell you, I worked in Breezewood area when I was young, and you know, it's an area filled with nothing but restaurants, truck stops, and people coming and going. There's a lot of that kind of thing. A lot of strangers. Although everybody's a stranger in that area, except for the staff that work in the building with you. And I had a woman walk in one time. She was crazy. She was high on something, and her first words to me was, "I just want you to know I have a gun and I'm going to kill you all." Then she went to the bathroom, and I made a dive for the back office and the cops, and took them 45 minutes to get there.
Wow. Okay.
And Breezewood's not a high priority spot. It just isn't. And because of this. And so, like, I ended up having to go back out, and like, I bought her breakfast and, you know, gave her stuff from the store, and just kind of kept her busy until they got there, and prayed that she didn't really have a gun, because I never saw the gun. She just said it. But I wasn't taking a chance. There was dozens and dozens of people in that building. And I had another guy who was obviously mentally ill. He had blood in his hair, he had white hair, so you could really clearly see it. It looked like he had swiped his hand through his hair and there had been blood on his hand. And he kept saying to me, "You made me sell the record player. It's all your fault. It's all your fault." And then he started talking to the weight machine, like you were having a conversation. And then he went in the bathroom, and I called my boss and I said, "I've already called the cops, and you do not pay me enough to deal with this. Get your butt down here right now." And then I bought them food. I gave them everything they wanted, and waited for the cops to come and get them. So my heart went out to this guy, because I can't imagine. I mean, I knew that what I thought, anyhow, that what I was dealing with were flesh and blood, just crazies. And, but he had this sense that what he saw was completely different, that these things were stalking him.
And his friends.
And his friends.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps the ghouls have changed their modus operandi to function better in the society the way we have it now. So now they live in cities. Now they use electronics. Like I said, they're not stupid. And now they stalk you, and they look for you. And when sufficiently scare you that they come and they take you. And they got all the time in the world, buddy. So I feel bad for this man. I hope he gets some peace in his life, because I can't imagine waiting for that to happen to you, your wife, or your child. So with that, that is the end of my stories tonight about ghouls. But if anybody has any bizarre stories like that you'd like to share, we would love to hear them. And I thank you for your time, your patience, and I hope stay inside at night, because like this one creeped me out. Like, I'm not going outside tonight.
All right. All right. And good night.
Good night.